But I must tell you, my friends, you who have waited faithfully for the punchline of this speech, that having consulted colleagues and in view of the circumstances in Parliament, I have concluded that person cannot be me.
Well, he's making the best of it there, isn't he? But essentially, the Tory party's heir apparent has been toppled. It has been an extraordinary few hours with the launch of Theresa May's leadership bid, in which she has had some very withering things to say about Boris's abilities as a negotiator. We also have Michael Gove, the man who was thought to be the future Chancellor, supporting Boris's bid for leader, declaring himself a candidate and essentially saying Boris cannot be trusted to be the leader. So you might not be surprised that this is what we've just heard from the former Mayor of London. We're joined by Owen Meredith, Conservative blogger, Mick Fealty, editor of Slugger O'Toole, and Conrad Landon from the Morning Star. Welcome to all of you. Obviously, we've got lots to talk about in the Labour Party too, but Owen, give me your first response to what you've just heard from Boris Johnson.
I think a bit of shock and surprise, but also, you know, talking to MPs this week, it was clear that Boris had enough support to get himself through to the ballot, but there was a bit of nervousness and a bit of lack of confidence, and I think it became clearer. And we now know Boris won't be the next Prime Minister.
Next question for him is who he's going to support as the leadership candidate.
Yeah, and that'll be a fascinating question because I think the assumption would be that it would be Michael Gove, but given Gove threw himself in the race and knifed Boris in the process, I suspect that may not be as clear-cut now.
And Mick Fealty, he really did knife him in language that in Westminster cannot be misunderstood. You can't trust him as a Prime Minister. And yesterday we learned from an email that was leaked from Michael Gove's wife, Sarah Vine, that they had concerns themselves about whether he was a man of his word.
Indeed. And I don't think I've ever witnessed anything in the last 20 years quite so dramatic in such a short period of time between two men who really for most of the campaign, along with Gisela Stewart, carried the Leave campaign across the line. So it's almost as though in the mouth of victory they have, I think Boris has snatched defeat. I'm not really sure how Gove is going to carry things through, having been so close to Boris having to pull out. Given that Boris has popular appeal in a way that Theresa May doesn't have, I think that's the. You know, I'm not sure really where Gove goes after this and how well he'll do in the competition.
Who do you think Boris Johnson is likely to support? Probably not Michael Gove at this point.
No, that's a hard one.
Liam Fox is still in the race. Liam Fox is a Brexiter. He comes from the same kind of worldview, one might say, as Boris Johnson.
He does, but even politically speaking, and Owen will probably speak more directly to this, but politically speaking, he's very much out on the far right. Boris has played around the middle. You know, in this, perhaps in the campaign, he got a little bit carried away in some of the debates. Really, he probably carries the can for immigration being such a kind of a branding stamp on the whole campaign. Certainly in the ITV debate, he went large on that, and it may be because Boris has got carried away on that side that people now look and see that there's a connection there between him and Fox. I'm not sure that connection is viable or desirable for him.
It may well be Theresa May at this point. He may be supporting someone who campaigned for Remain.
Indeed, and he could, in that relationship, pitch himself as the watchdog for the Brexiters. Janan Ganesh today, the FT columnist, said, if you want a Brexit, then vote for a strong Remainer like Theresa May. And at that time, when we thought Boris was still standing, he thought that the reverse might also be true. So Boris is a watchdog. Theresa is the technocrat, if you like, who can carry it across the line. That might be viable.
Oh, and obviously we've got bigger things to talk about today than the future of Boris Johnson, and we'll turn to that in a second. But is this the end of the road for Boris Johnson's ambitions to lead the Tory party at any point in the future?
Well, I think that very much depends on who the next leader is, what jobs they give him, if he wants a job, and can be trusted to take one in the views of whoever that leader is.
Lord Heseltine says he should be put in charge of the negotiations. He made the mess, let him clean it up.
Well, I think from the comments of Michael Gove and Theresa May, they don't seem to have confidence in him to do that. But I think he's got to prove himself. Don't forget, he's never been a Secretary of State, so he hasn't got that track record, although obviously he ran London very successfully for 8 years.
Mick Fealty, we heard from Theresa May today, commenting on Boris's skills as a negotiator in the press conference. She said the last time he did a deal with the Germans, he came back with 3 nearly new water cannon, which really sums up her judgment about him.
It does, and it was kind of light in a way. Well, I think one of the big mistakes that mainstream politicians make when they're trying to deal with the like of Boris or Donald Trump is to take them too seriously. And in a sense, she's kind of nailed something in there. Now, Owen said earlier on that he ran London. Well, to a certain extent, he did. He certainly had the office. He filled it with his magnificent, larger-than-life personality. But, of course, towards the end of that, not only was he able to run the whole of London, he was also able, for most of the last year, to be an MP as well, which tells you something about the part-time job that the Mayor of London actually is. It looks great. It's brilliant on the brilliant on the CV, but, there's a kind of a likeness to the guy that, and there are all kinds of initiatives that were already in play. The Olympics, the 2012 Olympics were really underway. A lot of the planning for that was already underway at central government level. He's a brilliant compere. He's a brilliant entertainer. He reaches out to parts that the Conservative Party can't reach otherwise. But I think she's nailed something there about his inability really to do the job that's coming up. Matthew Parris last week on RTE called him a middle-aged man in a hurry. And I think maybe he's just missed the bus.
The Conservative MP Andrew Mitchell, who supported Boris Johnson, has tweeted that he can still not understand why Michael Gove decided to stand for the party leader. We may get more of an understanding of that from Dominic Raab, the Tory minister who was also supporting Boris Johnson until this morning, when he withdrew his support and said in a statement that we are trying to elect a prime minister, not a school prefect, and also said that essentially Boris had welched on deals that were made with Michael Gove and others about what the new leadership team would look like. And that, Mick Fealty, in a sense confirms what was said in the Sarah Vine email yesterday, where there were serious doubts in the Gove household about whether you could actually trust Boris Johnson to do what he says he would do.
No, absolutely. And, I noted also that there was a reference to 2 of the major proprietors that had backed the Leave campaign, Paul Dacre and Rupert Murdoch. Well, Murdoch, but proprietor, Paul Dacre, managing editor of the Daily Mail, of course. And I think that it goes to some of the problems that the Leave campaign now have inherited from their campaign. In a sense, it was all things to all men. And when it came down to it, it looks as though all 3 of those main protagonists for Vote Leave all had 3 different ideas about what was going to happen afterwards.
Yeah. Incidentally, we're always looking to the markets to see how they respond to these kinds of Brexit decisions and these Tory leadership and Labour leadership issues. The pound is increasing in the short few minutes since Boris Johnson has made that announcement. The pound is increasing in its value. We always emphasise that those things go up and down. You don't want to read too much into a single day's trading or a single day's market effect, obviously. Conrad Landon has been sitting there very patiently listening to us talking about the Tory party. There are implications here, of course, for the Labour Party, because Theresa May has today given an undertaking that there will be no general election until 2020. She will serve out, if she's elected, she will serve out the remainder of this 5-year fixed-term Parliament. What will that mean for the Labour Party and for this leadership campaign?
Well, I think actually something that a lot of the petty squabbling that we've seen in the Labour Party in the past few days, all these MPs moving against Jeremy Corbyn, what it's disguised, what it's what it's distracted from is the fact that, as seen by today's news, the Tory party itself is in an awful state. David Cameron, was unable to convince his own voters for the case to remain in the EU, and Boris Johnson, for all, for as much as any of us might be terrified by the prospect of Boris Johnson being Prime Minister, actually for the Tory party, I think he was probably their best bet of winning a general election. And if the candidates that they're putting up in his that his side of the campaign are putting up in his place, Michael Gove, who had a remarkable ability to alienate everyone he came into contact with when he was Education Secretary, and Liam Fox, who has a reputation as a ideological right-winger and being very stubborn and not having any sort of public profile at all. I mean, I doubt, many people, if you went up to people on the street and asked them who Liam Fox was, I doubt they'd know. So I think, I think what this goes to show is that actually, if the Labour Party can pull together and stop this parliamentary bickering, then there's all to play for.
It's a bit more than parliamentary bickering at this point, isn't it? When 170 MPs vote that they have no confidence in the leader. Yes,
though having said that, they all of those. People have been saying that Jeremy Corbyn has lost the confidence of his MPs, and the reality is
that's factually the case.
No, he hasn't, because the reality is he never had it in the first place. He was elected. His support always came from the grassroots, and I'm pretty sure almost all of those MPs would have voted against him in the first place.
I suspect if Theresa May is elected and there is no general election, those MPs will be delighted that they do not have to go to the electorate, Conrad, in another election and say, vote for the Labour Party. We have no confidence in the man who would be Prime Minister if we are elected.
Well, yes. I mean, that's depending on them still being candidates at the next general election.
Oh, the deselection row now. We're going to have momentum pushing for deselection across all those constituencies.
Well, I don't think it will come from any particular organisation. But what I do know is that in a lot of those constituencies where their MPs have kicked off a huge fuss in the past few days, the activists who are on the ground, many of whom voted for Jeremy Corbyn 9 months ago, will be very have been very angry that their MPs are acting in this very sort of inward-looking, self-indulgent way in the past few days. So I don't think it won't come from Momentum or any other organisation. If it just remains. I think MPs who are in that position, they do need to remember that they're only parliamentary candidates in the first place because they've been selected by their local membership.
Overnight, we heard from one of the country's leading public law experts, Lord Pannock, David Pannock QC. Mick Fealty, I'll put this to you, who says he believes that the law is clear, that Parliament is sovereign, that this referendum is advisory, and that the Prime Minister cannot legally trigger Article 50 without an act of Parliament, which would mean if Theresa May is elected, she's told us she will not try to do that for 6 months, which means that early next year, we could be looking at a situation where MPs are asked to vote on whether they want to remain within the EU or trigger Article 50. At that point, it becomes a real question, will they have a free vote?
Now, that is a good question, and I hadn't thought of it in those terms, but he's absolutely correct. In the British system, which has unlike the Irish system, has an unwritten constitution. In other words, you need a lawyer like him to interpret all the various kind of statutes and put together. But that's right. It's advisory. It's not statutory. It doesn't carry the weight that, say, one would in the Republic. And yeah, I think it is an open question. It'll certainly be a point of controversy. It won't be. The DUP will certainly not have any problems with a free vote because they'll all go into the lobbies together. Whether the Conservatives do, I don't know. That's an interesting one. For me, this is only the beginning of the opening up of a very, very large can of worms. The electorate have told people very clearly, in principle, what they want, but the practice of doing that is going to be extremely messy.
Oh, and can we read Boris Johnson's departure here as an acknowledgement in some way that what he sold the British people in this referendum, he now knows he can't get it, and he doesn't want to be in a position as Prime Minister where he has to stand up and say, "You can't have what we told you could have."
No, I think what we can read into this is that it's clear that all the leadership candidates are committed to delivering the result of the referendum, which was, a majority of 1.25 million British voters have asked the government to enact for the departure from the European Union. That will happen, whoever the next Prime Minister is. I think what is interesting is...
Well, I'm not sure how you can say that with such confidence.
Because it's the will of the British people, and Parliament is there to enact the will of the British people.
Well,
when it comes to these matters.
What if Parliament is faced with a situation where the only deal on the table is that Britain gets access to the single market, but you have to pay the price of money into the EU budget, you're still subject to laws which you no longer have any say in, and you still have free movement of people across Britain from Europe. In those circumstances, would it be reasonable for Parliament to say to the British people, we don't think this is what you signed up for when you said leave?
Well, I think we had a 6-month debate, and a very intense debate at that, where the Remain camp made very clear that leaving the European Union, remaining a member of the single market, would have exactly that consequence. Now, what we haven't asked the British people is whether they actually want to remain a member of the single market or not. I suspect that question will not be put back to them in a referendum, because I suspect those who, in Parliament, the majority of MPs would want us to remain in the single market, would fear the result of that referendum.
Mick, Fealty and the others, do you believe we are seeing something like the remaking of British national politics at this point, a reinvention of national politics? Mick, first.
Yeah, no, I think certainly with the Labour Party, it's hard to say overall what effect Brexit is going to have. Certainly, if this goes to Parliament, it's going to put serious strains on some of the splits that have occurred within the Conservative Party. But the Labour Party is in bits. Let's face it, it isn't just a few rebels. That Jeremy Corbyn is dealing with. It's 81% of his parliamentary party is pulling in a completely different direction to the way he wants to go, and what's problematic for those parliamentarians is that the activists, not necessarily the voter base, because the voter base is more expressed, I think, by the MPs themselves, but the activist base is going in a completely different direction. It's hard to see how the Labour Party gets through this summertime and still remains the Labour Party that we've all known and recognised for 100 years.
Conrad,
this could really be the end of the road for the left.
Hypothetical, and I don't think this is unreasonable, is it, Conrad? Let's assume we have a leadership challenge from Angela Eagle today. It looks certain, doesn't it? We have a contest, and that Jeremy Corbyn is returned as the leader. Let's assume that. What happens then? He goes back to Westminster with MPs who feel alienated from him. Do they then just change their mind and say, we now do have confidence in him? Or do they break away from the Labour Party and become something else, perhaps even take the role of the official opposition because they'd have more MPs than him?
Well, it is all up in the air, and I think actually people are talking about that now. And some MPs have privately been briefing that they would be prepared to split. And there was an article from a Labour member of the European Parliament, as little power as MEPs will now have. But Mary Honeyball, a member of the European Parliament, yesterday wrote an article in the New Statesman in which she did publicly acknowledge the possibility of a breakaway,
a new kind of party,
SDP Mark II, essentially.
A gang of 172 this time.
Well, potentially, but it's still. if you look at, there was a significant number of Labour MPs that broke away and joined the SDP, and they did get wiped out. Or in some cases, they split the votes in constituencies, and the Tories were voted in.
There is a difference in this case, Conrad, because we wouldn't be looking at a general election. Probably, we'd be looking at a Labour split, where Jeremy Corbyn, if he's returned as the leader, is unable to form a shadow cabinet, in which case the Speaker will be asked, if there is a split, by that new party, whatever they're called, to recognise them as the official opposition.
Well, I think, we're that is all quite hypothetical still, even though
but it's where it's going.
Even though there's a possibility, it's hard to say what would happen in those circumstances. The point is, though, that even if they had the majority of MPs, the Labour Party, what remained of the Labour Party would still have the infrastructure, they would still have the members, they would still have the activist base, and I think it's hard to see.
You just wouldn't be the official opposition anymore.
Well, I mean, but it's hard to see that come a general election that a
In 4 years'
breakaway
time.
party would be able to mobilise in a sense that they could replace the Labour Party.
Yeah.
And fundamentally, at that point, you've got to ask what the Labour Party is for. If they didn't have the membership, they didn't have the trade unions who founded the Labour Party, they didn't have any of that, then, I mean, it would be something more like the US Democrats or the Liberal Democrats in Britain.
On that scenario, we've just been exploring the hypothetical scenario of Jeremy Corbyn returning as leader to a party who don't want, a parliamentary party who do not want him as leader. What do you think happens in that situation?
Well, I think the Labour Party is clearly in a very difficult position at the moment.
Well, there's the other statement of the day.
At the moment, we don't even have opposition appointments, so nobody is holding the government effectively to account, and that's not good for the government of this country. It's not good for the Conservative Party not to be held to account, and
Yeah.
I say that as a Conservative blogger. So, I mean, we're in interesting times. I think if as suspected, Jeremy Corbyn is put back to the membership and re-elected as leader, you may well get that realignment, and that might in itself trigger a much bigger realignment in British politics, which is probably long overdue. The right in this country tends to win when it's united behind the Conservative brand. We've seen a split of that in some ways off to UKIP. It'll be interesting to see where that falls post-referendum, and whether that UKIP vote or traditional right-wing UKIP vote falls back into the Conservative fold and can be absorbed by a new leader, or whether that breaks off and forms a new, or continues to exist under the UKIP brand, and whether if the Conservative Party moves to the right to mop that up, there are people on the sort of left centre wing of the Conservative Party who align themselves with some on the right centre of Labour to create a new progressive party.
Your guess is as good as mine. Owen, thank you very much. Owen Meredith, Mick Fealty and Conrad Landon. They've been great, haven't they? Responding very quickly to fast developments in Westminster around the Tory party, and also more to come with the Labour Party.